Hey everybody, welcome back to Markets and Madness. As we like to say, the place where we discuss the madness that occurs when politics, economics, and personalities all move in different directions. Tim and I here today talk about what's going on in the markets, and there's a few things that I've noticed. The biggest seems to be all this chatter about gold. Something that you and I spoke a couple of months ago about is I wouldn't want to own real estate in the Washington D.C. area, and seeing all sorts of posts about housing prices getting collapsing down there. So, what are you thinking, Tim?
There's a lot of talk I've been reading about people starting to talk about the possibility of revaluing gold, bringing it to market. We're carrying gold on our books at $42.50 an ounce.
Right?
We're supposed to have about 8,000, but Musk wants to audit that too, so God knows how much we really have.
Hasn't been audited in 50 years, right?
Yeah, but that's $1 trillion increase in asset size on the books. And you can't argue with it. Market value is what it is. I think it's worth talking about gold with respect to what it meant because I've heard the term Brenton Woods used a couple of times. And I don't know how many of our viewers really know what Brenton Woods was. So maybe we'll talk about that for a minute or two. Bretton Woods took place in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire after World War II. It was a meeting of global finance ministers. And they needed a way to stabilize currency values to stimulate world trade. And they came up with the Bretton Woods system of fixed exchange rates. So essentially, every major currency had a par value against the dollar. That was roughly where it was trading at the time. So, for example, the German mark, which was around at the time, was set at 4 marks to the dollar. So marks are about a quarter apiece. Swiss francs, sterling. And the idea was they would have a par value, and then they would let it fluctuate. When I started trading it, the range was 0.75%. So they would let a currency move up or down against the dollar 0.75%. And roughly at that point, that would trigger intervention by all the central banks, including the Fed. But if the pound dropped from, say, 240 to 238, 0.75%, they would step in and central banks would start buying pounds in unlimited quantities. And that really worked for a while because it kept the values were established, was okay. And the linchpin to that was the dollar. The dollar was set at $35 an ounce, or a 35th of an ounce of gold. So the idea was, if the dollar dropped, these central banks would buy dollars against their own currency. In other words, give up their own currencies at those intervention levels against the dollar. And then they could, if they wanted to, according to treaty, bring those dollars back to the U.S. Treasury and exchange them for gold at $35 an ounce. And that was the key to the whole thing. So that if we printed a lot of dollars and the dollar dropped, we were going to buy it, and the dollar was literally as good as gold. Well, the Great Society under Johnson and the war in Vietnam occurred, and we spent all kinds of money that we didn't have tax revenue for. But we didn't have deficits. We didn't borrow that money. The Fed essentially printed it, let the money supply grow. So, if you spend more than you got, you can print it or you can borrow it. Well, we were printing it. And the value of those dollars dropped, naturally, on the foreign exchange markets. And when the dollar reached its floor against all those currencies, these central banks stepped in. First, they revalued their currencies against the dollar. They picked new exchange rates and new levels. But that wasn't working because we were continuing to print. Just to give you an idea of the sense of how much money we were printing. HEW, Health, Education, and Welfare, which subsequently broke into Health and Human Services and Department of Education. HEW alone had a bigger budget than all but 3 or 4 countries in the world. HEW spent more than the government of Canada, spent more than Japan. So we were spending in the Great Society like crazy.
This
And
was
we were
mid
fighting.
60s, late 60s.
late 60s, and we're fighting a war in Vietnam, and our military expenditures were off the charts. But you didn't see any deficits then because we weren't borrowing the money, we were printing it. And as we printed it, the value of the dollar dropped. And against Bretton Woods, all these foreign central banks had to buy these dollars, including the Fed. So when they started ultimately bringing those dollars into the Treasury and saying, look, we want some gold for these dollars, Nixon closed the gold window and said, Bretton Woods over. And that was the end of Bretton Woods. It had collapsed long before that with all the revaluations and the central bank attempts to fix it. But once Nixon closed the gold window, they said officially, Bretton Woods is no more. And we floundered, the exchange rates floundered for decades after that. So now what they're talking about is revaluing the gold, which in effect sets gold at, I don't know, market, $3,000 an ounce. What could it be? $2,800 an ounce? And all of a sudden now the dollar's got a value against gold if we revalue the dollar. So if they want to bring gold to us at $2,800 an ounce, I suppose we'll buy it. Maybe that's the new agreement that they're talking about. At least that's what the market's starting to contemplate. So that would really do a number of things. That would create $1 billion, $1 trillion in national assets. Our balance sheet would go up by $1 trillion. So that would reduce the debt by $1 trillion. So that goes to 36 to 35. And we're financing 1/35 less to 1/36 less of the debt. So our interest rate expense in the debt goes down. And combine that with all this money that Musk is finding, and you've got a real chop at the debt. And that's what the markets are talking about now.
Yeah, we went so from Bretton Woods, when I got into the market in 79, we had a snake and each currency was revalued against another. And you had the snake that in that band that it could be in. And when it
Snake in
went
the
out
tunnel.
of that snake,
The snake in the tunnel, that's right.
all right, when we got out of the snake, then the central banks had to step in and protect the currency, and you saw devaluations. We talked about
But
them.
after Nixon closed the gold window and the dollar plummeted, we start to see inflation. But we really didn't see it so much. You would think that while we were printing all those dollars on the Bretton Woods, we would see inflation. But we didn't see it here. Europe saw it because we basically exported our inflation through Bretton Woods. And that's why they had to put a stop to it. So we really didn't see inflation until 74. And that was after the Yom Kippur War and OPEC revalued its currency, oil. See, OPEC didn't have a currency to revalue under Bretton Woods. So we were printing a limitless amount of dollars, and they had a finite resource in oil. So OPEC met to revalue their own commodity, oil. And when oil was revalued, it went from $4 a barrel to $44 a barrel. Then we saw the inflation run right through our economy. And that's when inflation got up to 22%. Basically, it made sense because we revalued oil from $4 to $44.
So if that's the case now, I mean, a lot of people, just talking about gold as the commodity, we spoke about it when we first started doing this podcast, September, October, that central banks were buying gold for bricks because gold was going to underpin bricks. And now it seems like with the new Trump administration, bricks are no more. Those central banks that have been buying gold aren't, there's no need for it at this point to back a bricks currency. So where is the new buying coming from? What do you think?
Maybe that's why the rumors about revaluing gold are. We set a new, this is basically a big reset button, if in fact it were to happen. And we would reset the dollar, and the dollar would now once again be the linchpin, but gold would be $2,800 an ounce or 3,000.
What if they set it at $1,000 an ounce?
They could set it at 5,000 an ounce too. And set it anywhere they want.
That's right. It's not a true mark to market. Well, gold has certainly been in play. I was looking at some charts this morning. GLD, the ETF, it's 280 now or something like that. I think it's up $100. in the last
Well,
2 years.
there's another inflation fear going on. I read an article this morning, and the point of the article was the Fed's given up on inflation. They changed their language about the trajectory, and nobody's serious about 2% inflation anymore. And that's what happened when they took their last cuts, and the 10-year backed up in their face. The market was then saying, okay, you've given up on inflation, and the yield curve steepened, and inflationary expectations rose.
Unless the Fed truly believes that the idea of cutting the government, cutting spending, cutting, closing down these buildings, selling these buildings that they have, are going to make an appreciable effect on the
Well,
overall
if they do
economy.
believe that, they certainly didn't believe it before the election.
Well,
And this happened before
there
the
was,
election.
there was nothing there before the election to grab hold of. But they did cut the last move by the Fed. What was it? A month ago? 2 months ago?
It was what, October? It was before the election, right? No, they cut after.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's what I'm thinking, that maybe the Fed does believe that there is something to the new administration and these cuts that are coming on. But gold has certainly been in play. Gold and silver certainly worked out well, and it looks like it's going to continue. I don't see where and why it would stop. You know, the way people talked about Bitcoin at 100,000 and going to 10x, to quote Alex Jihadi that we had on. Gold at $3,000. Why can't that go to 5x?
I gave two friends the book Popular Extraordinary Popular Delusions and the Madness of Crowds because we were talking about maybe crypto is a tulip bubble. Who knows?
Yeah, yeah. People certainly want to be a part of it. One thing I wanted to bring up, that, a trade that we missed, just looking at some charts from things that I've had in a portfolio, is it seems that the trade, and just looking at it, we missed it. Short the traditional defense contractors, long Palantir. Palantir has been the darling of the equity markets for the last couple of years, and it was stagnant for a while. And we saw some big earnings, and it's been a huge move higher this year. But primarily since the election, we've seen. And my thinking was, you look at something like General Dynamics. General Dynamics is down, I don't know, $80, $100 since the 25, 30% since the election, whereas Palantir is more than doubled. So I think these
Yeah.
people getting out of the old traditional defense stocks and into the way the new wars are going to be fought.
When Trump started talking about the Iron Dome around the U.S., I went out and I bought some Raytheon calls, and they're biting me in the ass. They collapsed for the very reasons you laid out. Thank God
Yeah,
I got Palantir, which
yeah,
covers a multitude of sins.
yeah. And I think that's going to continue. At some point, defense is going to get themselves together, and the fat is going to be cut, and there's still going to be opportunities there, and there's still going to be growth. We're still going to spend money on defense like
Well,
everybody
there's
else.
not a lot of companies that could put an Iron Dome up,
Yeah,
Raytheon, and it's not just us. What about Europe?
yeah,
Isn't Europe going to buy from our defense companies? I
yeah,
mean, they're talking about raising their defense budget to conform to NATO, talking about 3% instead of 2%. They haven't even reached 2%. If they go to 3%, the defense stocks are going to look really good.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, so maybe it's an opportunity to turn that around, buy traditional defense stocks. They have
Well, I like
certainly have
Raytheon.
moved up.
I like Raytheon because that's the dome stock.
And, I was reading something this morning, and it made me think a little bit, and I don't know if the time is right, but this guy's talking about Europe, and Europe might be on an opportunity. It's been sold off, it's been beaten up, and we've talked here for the last several months about it's an opportunity to buy the dollar because the U.S. is going to appreciate, money's going to flow in, we're going to see a lot of opportunities, and the thinking that maybe as we've seen the move from Argentina come to America and cut fat, cut ridiculous expenses, fraud, and maybe that same movement is going to move through Europe.
I think I figured out what's going on Social Security. There must be turtles on Social Security because they live 130 years. They get to
Carrots too,
130
right?
years old. The Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, they're teenagers, granted, but still. I think the paradigm shift here is, and I've been thinking about this, we talked around it a little bit, but essentially we have become accustomed over the decades to a consistent, although flawed, fiscal policy. We've been basically tax and spend, tax and spend, tax and spend, with very few interruptions. And markets have become accustomed to that. Well, markets get accustomed to anything if they last long enough. And we've been looking at a dysfunctional, obscene fiscal policy, taxing and spending, for decades.
As you pointed out, it used to be tax and spend and print and spend.
Yeah. So we've built that into our thinking. And as a result, we focus on monetary policy as if it's the key driver. And we look at monetary policy because we know fiscal policy is not going to change. Well, I got news for you. Fiscal policy is changing. And it's got a bigger input than monetary policy. Fiscal policy is making monetary policy superfluous. So now we're looking at types of changes, paradigm shifts. And we keep saying this time it's different. Those are the worst 4 words in the world. But I don't know. I've never seen anything like this. I've never seen anybody say we got 6 million people who are dead collecting Social Security. I've never seen anything like that.
Yeah, I saw today more people on the Social Security rolls than we have citizens.
Yeah, yeah, I like that.
Yeah, so it's like, a couple of years ago, we had more votes in a certain county than we had citizens.
Yeah, and the cemeteries had little signs say "I voted."
That's right. They had the patch. That's right, the sticker. Yeah, it certainly is interesting times. There's no doubt about it.
Well, that's the I think the danger in this market. You've got enormous event risk here, more than we've seen since the Carter years.
When you say event risk, do you mean tape bombs that
I
Trump's
do.
going to make a comment?
I do.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right now, example, we've been talking about revaluing gold. That's huge. We start talking about changing the tax code to something like a flat tax or 2-tier system or something like that. These are really big moves. They dwarf the impact of monetary policy. Because the thing about monetary policy is when you take it away, when you drain, you have to add. When you add, you have to drain. Fiscal policy is a whole different animal altogether. And now that we're shifting, I don't think the market has really shifted focus to fiscal policy yet.
We didn't believe it.
No, well,
And maybe
it'll
they
take
still
a
don't.
while. You get used to walking downhill. You think you're always going to be walking downhill.
Right. Yeah, it's. I read something yesterday, and we've talked about Doge and Trump has got a 2-year window, and then when the midterms come up, it's the report card. You gotta produce. The numbers gotta be real. And I read something yesterday. I think it was the Wisconsin Supreme Court. There's an election very soon, and the fear from the conservatives is that the Wisconsin Supreme Court can move left. And if they do, they can rejigger some of the county lines, voting lines. So now what was traditionally a red county, a red district, now becomes a blue district. And if you do that with a very slim majority in the House for the Republicans, changes everything around. You change all the committeeships, you change everything. Things that could be gotten away with are no longer in play.
They never get to the floor. Let me just throw a little something in here. What's blue has turned red.
In some cases, yeah.
Yeah. So you can't really rely on what is a blue district and what is a red district anymore.
Yeah.
But maybe that's just my
When is
bias.
when's the vote for governor in California?
Kamala, I thought, was ahead in the polls.
Yeah, she may be. I don't know. It seems like Newsom can't run. I guess he's term limit out
That I don't know.
because his name hasn't surfaced at all.
But if the fire didn't change their
Right.
outlook,
That's
I
what
don't know what will.
That's why I'm asking that question. Is it something that's coming up? Is it next November? Are we still?
If I were running for governor of California, I would get a film crew and walk over to a fire hydrant and turn it on and watch it leak and say, here you go. This is what you voted for. You want this? Or turn one on with that goes on and say, here you go. You want this? Take your pick.
Right. Or take a picture of that little fish that they're trying to save. I mean, there's been people talking that the water that Trump opened up is not getting to the people in LA. It was just going out into the ocean. I don't know if that's true either. I don't know what the story is. I haven't looked up into it enough, but there are claims on both sides, positive and negative. And I'm
Yeah.
just,
What I find interesting is that the Treasury has been making payments with no items attached to it. And that has become, what's the word they use? Not reactionary, but I'm at a loss for words. Um, where if you believe that there should be a description or a reason for the payment, then you're obstructionist, crazy right wing, you know. I've never seen a checkbook where you didn't write this is for rent, you know. But the trillion dollars, no problem. Where's it go? I don't know.
guy needs it. He's knocking on my door. Yeah. Yeah, and we've talked about it many times that once these cuts started happening and you started to have layoffs and you started to close down departments and agencies, you were going to get a lot of pushback. And we're starting to see that now. It was inevitable. Your feeling has
Well,
been,
yeah, the employment numbers are gonna suffer. And Trump's plan is to shrink the public sector and grow the private sector. And there's going to be a real long lag for that. So we're going to see employment numbers get ugly for pretty while. We may go into, he's got a lot of offsets for that to offset to prevent a recession, but he might not be able to. He put enough people out of work. They got severance and they'll be around for a while, and we'll still be bleeding money, and it's all part of the building metaphor. The windows are out and it's cold.
yeah, the
Knock the
heat's out.
walls
You're
down,
trying to
we'll live in the
replace the
touch.
furnace, trying to deal with all of that. Yeah, we still got, and we're right in the middle of that now. That's why I
Well, I
bring
think
it
it's
up.
just beginning. I don't think we're anywhere near the middle.
Yeah, the middle, when I say the middle of it, I think now people are starting to raise their head and scream and yell. It's going to get worse, no doubt about it. It's going to get a lot worse. The old story, it's a recession when your neighbor loses his job, a depression when you lose yours.
That's
There's going to be a
Reagan.
lot of that screaming.
That was Reagan.
Yeah, we read the other day that housing prices in the Washington D.C. area down 30% or something like that is what we talked about as well a while back, and that's I don't think that's a trend that's going to change anytime soon. I wouldn't want to be owning it. I wouldn't want to be buying this dip. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, you want to stay out of that dip. That's not a good dip for
That's
a
right.
while.
Let the piano fall. Yeah. So gold still looks good. You think maybe buying a traditional defense
Depends
companies
on
that have
time
been
frame.
beaten up?
If you're a weekly trader, no. If you look at it, say, I mean, I got a trade that's not working right now. I'm sticking with it. And that's the short gas and oil and long the drillers and the shippers.
Hmm.
That trade's blown up in my face so far, but
Hmm.
I've taken it with options, and the options are out in July and September. So I got a ways to go. But that trade is clearly not working, and I took it with a longer time frame.
Right. Right. Always the way of it. All right. Any other thoughts, comments you want to bring up?
Well, these are great times. I mean, these really watching what's going on and the squealing and the people saying, well, we got Musk derangement syndrome and he's got 20-year-olds working. Since when is that a problem? You know, we sent 20-year-olds to the army.
I saw Musk put up something on X where he said, if I wanted to look at your bank account, I could have done it with PayPal. It's like, I don't want to look at your bank accounts. I don't want to look at your, so I don't,
Yeah,
you give it to everybody else. You give it to your insurance company. You give it to your healthcare company. You give it to everybody wants your social security number. But if Doge is looking at it, it's a huge problem.
yeah. I mean, it's you hire consultants and you gotta let them work. We have enormous risk, and we tell them we want to execute the guy who's identifying it for us.
Yeah. And they keep going back and saying, well, let the government audit it. Let the government. I don't think they've done a hell of a good job in the last 40 years.
I would suggest that what we're finding uncovering would suggest that, yes.
Yeah. So I can't put a lot of faith in what the government does. I mean, it was the other famous Reagan quote, right? The fear when you got to worry when somebody says I'm from the government and I'm here to help, right?
Yeah,
That was his as
was
well.
the,
Yeah.
the worst, the most scary words of the English language.
All right.
I'm from the government. I'm here to help. Yeah.
I'm here to help. So you really can't trust anything that's coming through.
Listen, I was in the army. That was the ultimate, you know. And God
Yeah.
knows, God knows. You know, you work for a small company, and your boss watches every paper clip and pencil. And in a big company, you got a box of paper clips that nobody can find. They're in a supply room someplace. Nobody knows where the hell they are. You go to the government, you got buildings. They don't know where the building, what's in the buildings. That's
I
phenomenal.
worked with a guy who worked, it's only a short time, but he worked for a defense contractor. And we were talking about the $8,000 hammer. And he said, yeah, it's all a matter of the lawyers around it. He says what they price in and how everybody adds their little piece and all the protection that the defense contractor has to do in order to protect themselves. So they just pump that in and they add it to every item on the list. So whether it's the hammer, whether it's the toilet seat, everything gets bumped up by 4,000%
Yeah,
to justify it.
yeah. Private sector has a fluff factor of maybe 5%.
Right. Right.
Government has a fluff factor of 5,000%. Okay.
All right. Well, it's good. Once again, thanks for sticking around. If you're still here, we appreciate it. Give us your comments, subscribe, ring the bell, get the new content, and tell us what you think. Thanks, Tim. Talk to you
Okay.
later in the week.
You
Take
good?
care.